Poor dad restores horse trailer. Millionaire daughter cries after learning her father's secret. The old horse trailer sat at the edge of a dirt road in San Antonio, Texas, half hidden by overgrown mesquite bushes and rusted fence wire. It had been there for years, ignored by everyone who passed by. Everyone except Marcus Delgado, 38 years old, a single father who made his living fixing things other people threw away. Marcus was the kind of man who never complained out loud, even when his boots had holes in them and his electric bill was 3 months behind. He had calloused hands, a quiet voice, and a son named Diego, 10 years old, who followed him everywhere like a shadow. They lived in a small wooden house on the south side of San Antonio, not far from the railroad tracks. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and in winter the cold came right through the windows. But Marcus kept that house clean and warm as best he could, working long hours at a small auto and trailer repair shop owned by his boss, a fair man named Roy who paid him honestly but never paid him enough. That particular Tuesday morning, Roy called Marcus over before the shop even opened. He pointed toward the rusted trailer parked behind the lot. Customer brought that in last night and said, "Fix it or junk it," Roy said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "I am giving it to you, Marcus. If you restore it, we split the sale price." Marcus walked around the old trailer slowly, running his hand along the dented metal sides. He did not know yet that this broken-down horse trailer was about to change everything. Marcus spent that first morning just cleaning years of dirt and rust off the trailer, so he could see what he was actually working with. Diego sat on an overturned bucket nearby, doing homework on a clipboard, looking up every few minutes to watch his father work. The trailer was a 4-horse slant load model, probably 30 years old, with rotted wood floors, broken hinges, and a bent axle that would need serious straightening before it could ever be safe on the road again. Most men would have walked away. Marcus knelt down and started making a list on the back of an old receipt. He wrote down every part that needed replacing, every well that had cracked, every bore that had given out. The list was long, but Marcus had learned from a very young age that a long list was not a reason to quit. It was just a map of the work ahead. His father had taught him that. His father, a man named Robert Delgado, who had died 4 years earlier at the age of 67, leaving Marcus almost nothing except that lesson and a small toolbox with a cracked handle. Marcus kept that toolbox on the passenger seat of his truck every single day. He never left it home, never let Diego play with it, never lent it to anyone. It was the only thing his father had left him, and he treated it like it was made of gold. That evening, after dropping Diego off at his neighbor Miss Rosa's house, Marcus stayed late at the shop, grinding rust and measuring boards, already feeling something pulling him toward this project that he could not quite name. By the end of the first week, Marcus had the trailer stripped down to its bones. The rotted floor planks were gone, the broken hinges were off, and the bent axle was clamped in the straightening press. Roy walked by once a day to check progress, and every time he shook his head slowly, not in disapproval, but in something closer to quiet amazement. "You treat that thing like it owes you money," Roy said on Thursday afternoon. Marcus just smiled and kept working. The truth was that Marcus threw himself into projects like this one because it kept his mind from going to dark places. Since his wife Carmen had left 6 years ago, not long after Diego was born, Marcus had filled every quiet hour with work. Carmen had not been a bad woman. She had just been a young woman who was not ready for the life they had built together. And one morning she was simply gone. No fight, no explanation long enough to matter, just a note on the kitchen table and an empty closet. Marcus had sat on the edge of the bed for a long time that morning, holding Diego, who was just a baby and did not understand anything yet. Then he had stood up, made breakfast, and decided that his son would never feel the weight of that abandonment if Marcus could help it. Diego grew up knowing his father was always there. That was Marcus's whole life, work and Diego. And now this old trailer that was slowly beginning to look like something worth saving. He did not know yet what was hidden inside its walls. On the 9th day of working on the trailer, Marcus was replacing the interior side panels when his pry bar slipped behind the inner wall of the front compartment. He felt something that did not feel like metal or wood. He stopped and looked closer, using his flashlight to peer into the gap between the outer and inner wall. There was something wrapped in a piece of old canvas, wedged in tight like someone had put there on purpose. Marcus pulled it out carefully, his hands already knowing by the weight that it was not nothing. He set it on his workbench and unwrapped the canvas slowly. Inside was a small wooden stick, smooth and carved, about 10 inches long, with a small metal cap on one end. He turned it over in his hands. It looked handmade, old and deliberate. Carved into the side in small, careful letters were the initials R.D. Marcus. Felt a cold feeling move through his chest. R.D. Robert Delgado, his father's initials. He sat down on his stool and stared at the thing for a long time. His father had been a horse trainer and hauler for most of his life before his health gave out. He had traveled all over South Texas, moving horses for ranches and farms. It was not impossible that this trailer had once belonged to his father or that his father had worked on it. But why would his father hide something inside a wall? What was this carved stick, and what did it mean? Marcus wrapped it back in the canvas carefully and put it in his toolbox, right next to his father's old cracked-handled tools. He would figure it out. He always did. That weekend, Marcus took Diego to the public library in the old part of downtown San Antonio. Diego thought they were going to check out books about dinosaurs, which was his current obsession. Instead, Marcus sat at one of the computer stations and started searching for information about the trailer's registration history. Roy had given him the VIN number from the trailer's frame plate. It took a while, and the database was frustrating to navigate, but eventually Marcus found a chain of ownership records going back about 25 years. The trailer had passed through 3 different owners in Texas. The second owner on the list was a name that made Marcus go very still. Robert Delgado, San Antonio, Texas. His father had owned this trailer. Marcus leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath. Diego looked up from the dinosaur book he had grabbed anyway. "You okay, Dad?" Diego asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "Just found something surprising. Bud." He printed the page and folded it carefully into his shirt pocket. On the drive home, Diego fell asleep against the window, and Marcus drove in silence, thinking about his father. Robert Delgado had been a hardworking, honest man who kept his private life very private. Marcus had never questioned that when he was young. But now, sitting with a carved stick with his father's initials and a trailer his father had owned, he began to wonder if there were things about his father's life that he had never known, things his father had deliberately kept from him. The question was not a small one. It was the kind that changes everything once it gets inside your head. Marcus did not sleep well that night. He lay on his back in the dark, listening to the sound of freight trains passing a few blocks away, and thought about his father. Robert Delgado had been a quiet man, the kind who answered questions with short sentences and showed love through actions more than words. He had taught Marcus to fix engines, weld metal, read a horse's temperament, and work without complaining. Those were real gifts. But he had never talked much about his past, about where he came from or who he had loved before Marcus's mother. Marcus had never pushed. In their world, you did not push older men to open up. You respected their silence and waited. But his father was gone now, and the silence had turned into a locked door with no key. The next morning, Marcus called his aunt, his father's younger sister, Elena Delgado, who was 72 years old and still sharp as a tack, living in a small house in Uvalde. He had not spoken to her in almost a year. She answered on the second ring, pleased and slightly suspicious the way old women get when calls come unexpectedly. He asked her if she remembered his father ever owning a horse trailer. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father had a lot of things he kept himself, Marcus. A lot of things." Her voice had a weight to it that made him feel like she was choosing her next words very carefully. He asked her what she meant. She said, "Come see me. Do not bring the boy. Come alone." And then she hung up. Marcus drove to Uvalde on a Sunday morning, leaving Diego with Miss Rosa, who lived next door and who loved the boy like her own grandchild. The drive was about an hour and a half west through flat ranch country, past cattle gates and windmills, and a kind of Texas landscape that looks exactly the same for miles and miles. Elena Delgado met him at the door of her small house with a hug that lasted longer than usual. She made coffee without asking if he wanted any, and put a plate of pan dulce on the table between them. Then she sat across from him and folded her hands and looked at him the way people look at you when they are deciding how much truth you can handle. Marcus put the carved stick on the table between them. Elena looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she closed her eyes for just a moment. "Where did you find that?" she asked. He told her about the trailer, about the hidden wall, about the initials. She nodded slowly as he talked, like someone listening to a story they already knew the ending of. When he finished, she picked up her coffee cup, held it with both hands, and said, "Your father had another life before your mother, Marcus. A life he walked away from when he was very young. He had a daughter." Marcus felt the air leave the room. He sat very still. He did not say anything for a long time. Elena looked at him steadily. "Her name is Victoria. She is rich now, richer than anyone in this family has ever been, and she does not know you exist." Elena told him the story slowly, pausing often, choosing each detail with care the way you do when you're finally saying something you have held inside for decades. Robert Delgado had been 22 years old when he fell in love with a woman named Patricia Harmon, the daughter of a wealthy ranch owner in the hill country outside of Kerrville. They had met when Robert came to work on the Harmon ranch one summer, training young horses. Patricia was beautiful and kind, and completely different from anyone Robert had ever known. They fell in love fast and hard the way young people do when they do not yet understand consequences. Patricia became pregnant. Her father, a proud and powerful man named Harold Harmon, did not accept Robert. He was poor, Mexican-American, with no education beyond what the land had taught him. Harold Harmon paid Robert to leave and never come back. He made it very clear that if Robert stayed, his life would become very difficult in ways that a poor young man with no connections could not fight. Robert was not a coward, Elena said, her voice firm on that point. He was a young man with nothing and nowhere to go, and Harold Harmon was the kind of man who kept his promises, the bad ones especially. Robert left. He never knew if the baby was a boy or a girl. He carried that for the rest of his life. The carved stick, Elena explained, was something Robert had made with his own hands during that summer on the Harmon ranch. He had always meant to give it to his child someday. He never got the chance. Marcus drove back to San Antonio in silence, both hands on the wheel, the carved stick wrapped in canvas on the passenger seat beside his father's toolbox. His mind was working through everything Elena had told him, turning each piece over and over like a mechanic checks a part before trusting it. He had a half-sister, a woman named Victoria Harmon. Elena had told him that Victoria's grandfather Harold had died years ago, and that Victoria had inherited the entire Harmon operation, which had grown far beyond horses and cattle into commercial real estate and agricultural investments spanning 3 counties. She was wealthy in a way that was hard to imagine from the south side of San Antonio. And she did not know that her father, the man who had disappeared from her life before she was even born, had gone on to have a son who was right now driving a 15-year-old truck with a cracked windshield down Interstate 10, holding a carved wooden stick that connected them both to a man who had loved them from a distance and never known how to close it. Marcus thought about Diego sleeping peacefully at Miss Rosa's house. He thought about what this might mean, what it might change, and whether a woman like Victoria Harmon would even want to know any of this. He thought about his father keeping all of this inside for 67 years. Then he thought about the trailer, still sitting in Roy's shop half-finished, waiting for him. He would finish the restoration first. His father had owned that trailer. He would make it beautiful again. After that, he would figure out the rest. The restoration of the horse trailer became something more than a job after that Sunday drive to Uvalde. Marcus worked on it every evening after his regular shift ended, sometimes until 9 or 10 at night, with a work light clamped to frame and a country station playing low on an old radio. Roy noticed a change in the pace and quality of the work and said nothing, which was his way of saying everything. The new floor went in first, solid oak planks, sanded smooth and sealed against weather. Then the walls, new aluminum panels, cut clean and fitted tight. The hinges were replaced with heavy-duty stainless steel. The axle came back perfectly straight. The wiring was all new. Marcus repainted the whole exterior a deep slate gray with white trim, the colors his father had painted his own stock trailer years ago, a detail Marcus remembered without knowing why he remembered it until now. He added small details that nobody asked for, things that came from his own hands and his own sense of how something ought to look when it was done right. By the time he was finished, that trailer looked better than the day it was built 30 years ago. Roy walked around it twice without speaking. Then he said, "Marcus, I have sold a lot of trailers in my life, and I have never seen a man put that kind of care into something that was not his own." Marcus looked at the finished trailer and thought it was his own, in a way. Everything his father had touched was his own. He wrapped the carved stick carefully and put it in the glove compartment of his truck. It was time to find Victoria Harmon. Finding Victoria Harmon was not as hard as Marcus had expected. Her name appeared in county business records, in a local Kerrville newspaper feature from 2 years back about ranching families, and on the website for Harmon Land and Cattle, which listed her as owner and chief executive. She was 40 years old, unmarried, and by all appearances ran her late grandfather's empire with the same iron hand he had. Her photograph on the company website showed a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, and the kind of expression that said she was used to being the most prepared person in any room. Marcus stared at that photograph for a long time on his phone screen. One evening, while Diego ate dinner across the table. "You know her, Dad?" Diego asked without looking up from his rice. Marcus shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said. The question of how to approach her stayed with him for several days. He could not just call the company number and ask to speak to the owner about being her half-brother. He could not write a letter that would be screened by an assistant and probably never reach her. He needed something real, something concrete, something that would make her understand before she had a chance to dismiss him as a stranger with an unusual story. He kept coming back to the trailer. His father had owned it. His father had hidden the carved stick inside its wall. The trailer connected them, Marcus and Victoria, through their father's hands. If he could get that trailer in front of her, with the stick and the history behind it, maybe she would listen long enough to hear the truth. Marcus asked Roy if he could borrow the trailer for a week once the restoration was fully complete. Roy raised an eyebrow but did not ask too many questions, which was one of the things Marcus respected most about the man. He drove the trailer up to Kerrville on a Saturday morning with Diego beside him in the truck, the boy asking every 20 miles where they were going and why. Marcus told him they were delivering something to a customer. It was not exactly a lie. The Harmon Ranch was about 12 miles outside of town, marked by a stone entrance gate with the Harmon name cut into it. Marcus pulled up slowly, stopped at the gate call box, and asked if he could speak with Miss Harmon about a horse trailer that had once belonged to her family. There was a long pause. Then a woman's voice asked his name and business. He gave his name and said he was a trailer restorer from San Antonio with something that might interest her. Another pause. Then the gate opened. Marcus drove through slowly, looking at the land spreading out on both sides of the gravel drive. Green pastures, good fences, horses in the distance. His father had walked this land when he was 22 years old and in love. Marcus gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. They stopped in front of a large stone house with a covered porch running the full length of the front. Victoria Harmon stood on that porch with her arms crossed, watching his truck and trailer come up the drive. Even from that distance, Marcus could see the sharpness in her eyes. He parked, stepped out, and looked up at her. She looked down at him. Neither of them knew yet what was about to happen. Victoria Harmon came down the porch steps with the deliberate stride of someone who does not waste movement. She was wearing ranch clothes, jeans and boots, and a collared shirt. Nothing fancy, but everything about her said she was a person in charge here. She stopped about 10 feet from Marcus and looked at the trailer first, then at him. "That is a nice restoration," she said, her voice even and businesslike. "What is it you think my family had to do with this trailer?" Marcus introduced himself, kept his voice calm, and explained that the trailer's ownership records showed it had once been registered to a Robert Delgado of San Antonio. He said that Robert Delgado was his father, now deceased. He said that his father had worked on the Harmon Ranch about 40 years ago, training horses, during a summer that mattered to him. Victoria's expression did not change on the outside, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Who told you that?" she asked. Marcus said he had family in Uvalde who remembered. He did not say more than that. Not yet. Victoria looked at the trailer again, walked around it slowly, running a hand along the side panel the way someone does when they're feeling for something they cannot name. She stopped at the front compartment, put her hand flat on the wall, and stood there for a moment with her back to him. Diego had climbed out of the truck and was standing quietly beside his father, watching. Victoria turned back, and her voice was still level, but something underneath it had changed. "You said your father is deceased. When did he pass?" "4 years ago," Marcus said. She nodded once and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Come inside." They sat in a large kitchen that smelled like coffee and cedar wood. A woman named Gloria, who worked for Victoria, brought cups to the table without being asked. Diego sat beside his father and looked at everything with wide eyes but did not speak, because his father had taught him that listening was more valuable than talking in rooms you did not yet understand. Victoria sat across from Marcus with her hands flat on the table. She asked him what he actually wanted. Marcus said he did not want anything, that he had come because of something he found inside the trailer during the restoration. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed the carved stick on the table between them, still wrapped in the piece of canvas. Victoria looked at it, but did not touch it. "Unwrap it," Marcus said quietly. She looked at him for a moment, then slowly unwrapped the canvas. She held the carved stick in both hands and turned it slowly. When she saw the initials RD on the side, her face went very still in the way faces go still when something reaches a person somewhere deep and unexpected. She sat down on the table carefully, placed both hands flat beside it, and breathed slowly. "My grandfather told me my father was a man who left before I was born," she said. "He never gave me a name. He said the man was nobody, that he had walked away without looking back." Marcus felt the weight of that word, nobody, and what had it caused his father to become that word to someone he had loved? "That is not what happened," Marcus said. Marcus told her everything Elena had told him. He kept his voice steady and factual, the way he talked when explaining a complicated repair, going through each piece in order without dramatizing it. He told her about Robert Delgado, 22 years old on her grandfather's ranch, in love with her mother Patricia, sent away with a payment and a threat from Harold Harmon, a man powerful enough to make a poor young man disappear without a fight. He told her that Robert had carried the weight of that departure his entire life, that he had never spoken of it to Marcus directly, that Elena had been the only one who knew. Victoria listened without interrupting, which Marcus noticed. A person who interrupts is defending something. She was not defending. She was absorbing. When he finished, she looked out the kitchen window toward the pastures for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you have any proof beyond the trailer registration? And this stick and what your aunt told you?" Marcus said he had the trailer records, his aunt's testimony, and a small photo his aunt had given him before he left Uvalde. A photo of a young Robert Delgado standing beside a horse on what was clearly the Harmon Ranch, based on the stone gate visible in the background. He slid the photo across the table. Victoria picked it up and looked at it for a very long time. Her chin moved once, just slightly. Then she set the photo down and looked at Marcus directly. She said, "I need to think." He said, "I understand." He meant it completely. Marcus and Diego drove back to San Antonio that afternoon with the trailer still attached. Victoria had asked him to leave his phone number with Gloria before he left, which he did. He did not know what to expect after that. He told himself he had done what he came to do, that the rest was not in his hands. But that night, after Diego was asleep, Marcus sat on the back step of his house and felt the full weight of everything pressing down on him. He had a half-sister who was wealthy and powerful and had grown up believing her father was a man who had chosen to leave. She had been given that story by a grandfather who had built his identity around being the person who decided things, who controlled outcomes, who protected his family by removing inconvenient complications like a young Mexican-American horse trainer who had fallen in love with his daughter. Marcus thought about what it must have done to Victoria, growing up with that story. He thought about what it had done to Robert, spending 40 years carrying the truth of what he had left behind. He thought about the carved stick, made by his father's hands, hidden inside a trailer wall, waiting for someone to find it. His father had not thrown that stick away. He had not burned it or buried it. He had hidden it somewhere it would be found if someone looked carefully enough. Marcus thought that was the most important thing. His father had not given up on being found. He had left the door open, barely, just barely, and Marcus had walked through it. 3 days passed with no call. Then 4. Marcus went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Diego with homework, lay awake at night. On the 5th day, His phone rang from an unknown number. He answered on the second ring. It was Victoria. Her voice was different from the first meeting, less armored. She said she had spent 5 days doing her own research. She had contacted a genealogy service, compared the photo Marcus had sent her of Robert to old photographs her mother had left behind. Patricia Harmon had passed away 11 years ago from cancer, but she had kept a small box of photographs in her closet that Victoria had never fully examined. In one of those photographs, a young man stood beside her mother outside the stone barn at the south end of the ranch. They were laughing. He was clearly the same young man in the photo Marcus had given her. Victoria's voice caught for just a moment, one small hitch, and then she steadied herself. She said she had also ordered a DNA comparison kit that she wanted to be certain before she said or did anything else, and she asked if Marcus would be willing to submit a sample. He said yes without hesitating. She said she would send the kit to his address. He thanked her. She said, "Do not thank me yet. I do not know what this means or what comes next. I just know that I need to know the truth." He said, "So do I." There was a brief silence between them that was not uncomfortable. Then she said goodbye and ended the call. Marcus stood in his kitchen for a moment, then went back to making Diego's lunch for the next day. The DNA kit arrived 2 days later. Marcus completed his portion that same evening, sealed it, and sent it back the next morning. The waiting period was listed as 7 to 10 business days. Marcus told himself he would not count the days. He counted every one of them. During that time, life continued in its ordinary way. He fixed trailers and truck beds at Roy's shop. He helped Diego with a school project about the Texas Revolution. He called Elena once to update her, and she listened quietly and said, "Your father will be glad you are doing this, Marcus." He also received a message from Victoria's assistant asking if he would be available for a call the following week regardless of DNA results, to discuss what she called next steps in the matter. The phrase next steps made Marcus uneasy in a way he could not fully explain. It sounded like something a lawyer would say. He mentioned this to Roy, who had by now been told a simplified version of the situation. Roy leaned on the shop counter and said, "Rich people always use lawyers when money gets close to the conversation. That does not mean she is being dishonest. It just means she is being careful." Marcus accepted that. He understood careful. He had been careful his whole life. Careful with money. Careful with Diego. Careful not to want things he could not afford. The difference was that Victoria's version of careful came with resources and professionals behind it. His version came with a second job on weekends and a father's toolbox on the passenger seat. He did not resent the difference. He just noticed it. The DNA results came back on a Thursday afternoon while Marcus was under a truck at the shop. His phone buzzed in his chest pocket, and he slid out from under the vehicle and sat up on the concrete floor to read the message. The service sent results through a secure app. He logged in with hands that were still greasy and read the summary. The result was clear. Marcus Delgado and comparison sample submitted under the name VH shared a biological relationship consistent with half-siblings with a confidence level of 97.4%. Marcus sat on the concrete floor of Roy's shop for a full minute without moving. Roy walked by, noticed his expression, and crouched down beside him. "What did it say?" Roy asked. "It said she is my sister," Marcus said. Roy sat down on the concrete next to him, which was not something a 60-year-old man did easily, and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Well," Roy said, "I guess now you have to figure out what to do with that." Marcus nodded slowly. He called Victoria that evening. She had already seen her results. Her voice on the phone was very quiet, not the controlled business voice, not the careful measured tone, just quiet, like someone sitting alone in a large house with a lot of years of questions suddenly answered. She said, "I did not have any brothers or sisters growing up. My grandfather made sure of that. He controlled everything." Marcus said, "Neither did I." Another silence, longer this time. Then Victoria said, "I think we need to meet again." He said, "I think so, too." This time Marcus drove to Kerrville alone. Diego stayed with Miss Rosa, who had been told only that Marcus had some important family business to handle. Victoria met him on the front porch of the stone house, and this time there was no arms cross assessment, no measuring look. She simply said, "Come in," and led him through the house to a back sitting room that felt more personal than the kitchen, with photographs on the walls and a worn leather couch that had clearly been used and loved for years. She poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from him and said, "I have been angry." He nodded. "I understand that." She said, "Not at you, at my grandfather, at the story I was given, at 40 years of not knowing." He said, "My father was angry too, I think, but he turned it inward. He never told me." She looked at the carved stick, which Marcus had brought again and placed on the side table. She said, "He made that during the summer he worked here. My mother told me once, when I was very young, that she had loved a man who carved beautiful things from wood. I did not understand what she meant then." She paused for a long moment. "I think she kept loving him for the rest of her life, even after everything my grandfather did." Marcus felt something shift in the room, something heavy and old finally beginning to move. He said, "My father kept a photograph of this ranch in a drawer until the day he died. I never knew why until now." Victoria looked at the carved stick and then back at him. Then she said, "I want to know everything about him. Tell me everything." They talked for 4 hours. Marcus told her everything he knew about Robert Delgado, which was both more and less than she deserved. He told her about the toolbox and the lessons, about the way his father fixed things with a patience that seemed bottomless, about the way he could read a horse's mood from across a field. He told her about the small house in San Antonio and the quiet evenings and the way his father cooked beans and rice every Sunday like it was a ceremony. Victoria listened to every word and asked questions, real questions, the kind that meant she was building a picture in her mind. She told him things, too, about growing up on the Harmon Ranch with a grandfather who loved her but controlled everything around her, about feeling like something was always missing, like the story she had been given had a chapter torn out, about taking over the business after Harold died and working for years to make it her own rather than his, about the loneliness of sitting in a large house full of her grandfather's things and feeling like none of it was actually connected to who she was. At some point, Gloria brought coffee, and neither of them noticed when it went cold. When they finally stopped talking, it was dark outside. Marcus looked at the time on his phone and realized Diego would be worried. Victoria walked him to the door, and they stood on the porch for a moment. She said, "I have a lawyer." He said he knew. She said, "I want to make sure whatever comes next is done right, for both of us." He said, "I am not here for the money." She looked at him steadily. "I know that," she said. "That is why I trust you." The weeks that followed were complicated in ways Marcus had not fully prepared for. Victoria's lawyer, a careful and thorough man named David Espinoza from San Antonio, reached out to arrange a formal meeting. Marcus went alone, without a lawyer of his own, which David Espinoza immediately and firmly told him was something he needed to change before any further conversations took place. Marcus took that advice. He called a legal aid clinic he had used once before for a landlord dispute and explained his situation. They referred him to a family law attorney named Sandra Reyes, who took his case on a reduced fee basis after hearing the details. Sandra was sharp, direct, and clearly unimpressed by complexity or wealth, which was exactly the kind of lawyer Marcus needed. She reviewed everything, the DNA results, the trailer records, the photo, Elena's testimony, and sat back in her chair and said, "You have a legitimate claim here, Marcus, but I want you to be clear about something. This is not just about money. This is about recognition, about your father's identity and yours. Getting that right matters more than the financial settlement." Marcus agreed completely. He told Sandra that his priority was a relationship with Victoria, not a legal battle. Sandra nodded and said, "Good, because Victoria Harmon's lawyer is telling me the same thing about her." David Espinoza and Sandra Reyes scheduled a joint meeting for the following Tuesday. Marcus drove there in his truck with the cracked windshield and his father's toolbox on the seat beside him. He thought about what his father might have said about all of this. He decided his father would have told him to do the right thing and not count what it cost. The joint meeting between the two legal teams lasted most of a day. Marcus and Victoria sat across from each other at a conference table with their respective lawyers on either side, and for the first 2 hours it was formal and careful and moved slowly. But somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, Victoria looked at Marcus across the table and said, "Can we stop for a moment?" Both lawyers went quiet. Victoria said, "I keep thinking about something you told me, about the carved stick, about your father hiding it inside the trailer wall. She paused. He could have thrown it away. He could have burned it. But he put it somewhere it could be found. I think he was hoping someone would look closely enough. Marcus said, I think so too. Victoria said, I want you to know that I am not doing this because of legal obligation or because I am afraid of what happens if I do not. I am doing this because he was my father too, and you are his son, and I do not want to be the kind of person who lets families sit on opposite sides of the table treating each other like strangers. David Espinosa cleared his throat gently. Victoria looked at him. I am getting there, David, she said. Then she looked back at Marcus and said, My grandfather built this fortune on land and work, and more than a little pride about who was worth including and who was not. I intend to do things differently. Sandra Reyes glanced at Marcus. He gave a small nod. The afternoon moved differently after that. The agreement they reached was not something either lawyer had anticipated writing when they first sat down. Victoria's proposal was straightforward and, in the context of what her grandfather had done, remarkable. She proposed dividing the Harmon estate into 3 equal portions. 1/3 for herself, 1/3 for Marcus as the acknowledged son of Robert Delgado, and 1/3 set aside in a trust for Diego to be administered until he reached 21 years of age. Marcus sat very still when he heard the numbers. The Harmon estate was not simply land and cattle. It included commercial real estate holdings, investment accounts, and property valued in total at something that made Marcus feel like the floor of the conference room had tilted slightly. Sandra put a hand on his arm and said quietly, Take your time. Marcus looked at Victoria across the table. She was watching him with those sharp eyes that were, he now understood, their father's eyes. He said, Why equal thirds? She said, Because my grandfather divided things according to what he thought people deserved. I am not doing that. You and Diego are family. Equal is equal. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I do not want Diego to grow up thinking he is rich. I want him to grow up the way my father raised me, knowing how to work. Victoria said, Then let us write the trust to reflect that. Let him access it when he has earned it. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he looked at his lawyer. Sandra said, I think we can work with this. 6 months after the agreements were finalized, Marcus Delgado was still working at Roy's shop in San Antonio, now as a co-owner, his name on the sign. Roy's Trailer and Truck Repair had a new line below the main letters that read in smaller type, established with pride, which had been Roy's idea and which made Marcus laugh every time he saw it. He had used a portion of his inheritance to upgrade the shop's equipment, add a second lift, and hire 2 more mechanics. He had also, quietly and without making a big announcement, paid off the mortgage on the small house near the railroad tracks where he and Diego had lived for years. The cracked windshield on his truck had been replaced. His boots no longer had holes in them, but he still drove the same truck, still wore the same kind of work clothes, still brought his father's toolbox to the shop every morning and set it on the workbench where he could see it. He had been offered the opportunity to move to a larger house, to a better neighborhood, to a life that looked from the outside like what most people would call success. He had taken some of those steps and declined others deliberately because he understood the difference between improving your life and losing track of who you are. Diego was 11 now, doing well in school, spending 2 weekends a month at the Harmon Ranch learning about horses and land and the kind of patience that animals require. Victoria had turned out to be a natural teacher of those things, which Marcus found did not surprise him at all. Victoria Harmon changed in ways that people around her noticed but could not always name. She was still sharp and direct and completely in command of her business decisions. She still arrived at meetings prepared when everyone else was still finding their notes. But she laughed more often. She asked more questions. She showed up at the stone barn in the morning sometimes and stood looking at the restored trailer for a few minutes before starting her day, like some people look at photographs of people they have loved and lost. She started calling Marcus on Sunday evenings, not about legal matters or property decisions, but just to talk, the way siblings talk when they are still learning the shape of each other. She asked about Diego constantly. She asked about Roy in the shop. She asked about Miss Rosa and Elena in Uvalde. She was, Marcus thought, assembling a family in the same careful, methodical way that he assembled a truck, one piece at a time, checking each connection before trusting it with weight. Her friends and colleagues noticed that she was different and asked about it. She told some of them the truth and watched their faces process it. A few of them were uncomfortable with the story. Most of them were moved by it. One of her oldest friends, a woman named Carla, who had known Victoria since school, said that she had always felt like Victoria was holding something at arm's length, and now she wasn't anymore. Victoria said, "I was waiting for something I did not have a name for." Carla said, "And now?" Victoria said, "Now I have a brother." That was enough. On the first anniversary of the day Marcus drove the restored trailer through the Harmon Ranch gate, Victoria organized a small gathering at the property. It was not a formal event, not a celebration in the way wealthy people typically mark occasions, with caterers and presentations and speeches designed for photographs. It was just people who had become connected through the story, gathered on the land where it had started. Roy and his wife drove up from San Antonio. Elena came from Uvalde, moving slowly but steadily, pleased in the deep settled way of someone who has carried a secret for 40 years and finally set it down. Sandra Reyes came. Miss Rosa came, insisting she was only there to make sure Diego ate properly, which made everyone who knew her smile. Diego spent the afternoon with the horses and came inside at sunset with hay in his hair and a grin that his father recognized as the happiest version of the boy's face. They ate outside on long tables while the light went gold over the pastures, and Marcus sat for a moment between Elena on his left and Victoria on his right and thought about his father. Robert Delgado had walked this land when he was 22 years old with nothing but his hands and his skill and his love for a woman who loved him back. Harold Harmon had tried to erase him, but you cannot erase a man who carved his initials into wood and hid them inside a wall for someone to find. Marcus had found them, and all of this, the people at the table, the laughter, the horses in the pasture, the restored trailer in the stone barn, this was what his father had hidden there, waiting. Addictive stories. Some things survive everything.